Today we'll be starting off with your chapter number 17 of A2 Biology, which is Selection and Evolution. So in this chapter, we are going to learn the genetic and environmental factors that affect phenotypic variation, explain the differences between continuous and discontinuous variation, explain how natural selection takes place, including antibiotic resistance, differences between stabilizing, disruptive, and directional selection. What is the founder effect, genetic effect, Hardy-Weinberg principle and equation, selective breeding, evolution क्या है, DNA sequence क्या है, and allopatric and sympatric processes में क्या फर्क है? So, can you tell me what is variation?
Difference. Like
Difference,
there's like a
diverse.
variety.
Exactly. In chapter 16, you saw how sexual reproduction produces genetic variation among the individuals in a population, and it can be caused by the independent assortment of chromosomes, therefore alleles during meiosis. It can also be caused by the crossing over between chromatids of homologous chromosomes during meiosis or random fusion of gametes, because obviously out of all the million sperms, only one of the sperms gets selected. Variation can also be caused by mutation. So independent assortment, crossing over, random fusion, and mutation are the causes of genetic variation. The first four of these processes reshuffle existing alleles in the population. फर्क किस चीज में आता है? शफल क्या चीज होती है? एलील्स होती है। ये तो नहीं ना कि जीन ही बदल जाए। जैसे अगर मैं कहूँ किसकी आईज है और दूसरी की आईज ही ना हो, आईज है सबकी, आईज का कलर फर्क है। एलील्स मीन द टाइप ऑफ दैट फिनोटाइप, इट्स नॉट द फिनोटाइप कि प्रेजेंट होगा या नहीं होगा। मतलब एक गोट की आंखें होंगी, दूसरे गोट की आंखें नहीं होंगी, क्या होंगी? दोनों की होंगी, बट ड्यू टू दैट इंडिपेंडेंट असॉर्टमेंट एंड क्रॉसिंग ओवर, दोनों के पास आंखें हैं। They have the same genotype, they have the same phenotype, but they have the different type of phenotype, which is the allele, जो shuffle हो गए हैं. Offspring have combinations of alleles which differ from those of their parents and from each other. The genetic variation produces phenotypic variation. What is phenotype and what is genotype? Can you explain me?
Phenotype is what contributes to the physical appearance. For example, eyes or the color of the hair, like the color of the eyes and the color of the hair. Genotype variation is like what the genetic makeup of the organism of the offspring is. So genotype.
Good. Mutation, however, does not reshuffle alleles that are already present. Mutation, which is described in chapter 6, can produce completely new alleles, and this may happen, for example, if a mistake occurs in DNA replication so that a new base sequence occurs in a gene. This is probably how the sickle cell allele of the gene for the production of beta globulin polypeptide first arose as well. Such a change in mutation, new allele पे क्या पता recessive भी हो सकता है, and so it frequently does not show up in a population until some generation के बाद कोई ऐसा descendant आ जाए जिसके बाद दो recessive आ जाए. That's when a mutation can obviously happen. Genes are not the only cause of differences between phenotypes of organisms of the same species. The environment also affects the phenotype. Can you tell me how would the environment affect?
For example, for example, to save themselves, to save themselves in order from being a prey from a predator, most animals would either like adopt a camouflage type skin to help them hide in the environment. So that could be one of
Exactly.
like,
Survival of the
yeah.
fittest is one of the main environmental factor that affects phenotype. For example, a plant that has the genotype and it allows it to grow tall will only be able to grow tall if it has plenty of sunlight. उस sunlight को लेने के लिए it's gonna grow tall and have a good supply of minerals and water in the soil. If these are lacking, then it will not grow to the potential size determined by its genotype. The phenotype of an organism is a result of interaction between genetic and environmental factors. So genetic variation here due to mutation that occurs in the body cells often has no effects at all on the organism. If only one cell is affected, then the overall function of the tissue of which the cell is part continues at normal. Exception वो है कि जब एक ही cell है तो कोई बात नहीं. But when it starts to divide uncontrollably, it can develop into a tumor. ट्यूमर भी फिर दो टाइप्स के होते हैं, एक बिनाइन होता है और एक मेलिग्नेंट होता है. बिनाइन इज द वन दैट कैन स्टे इन वन प्लेस. Malignant tumor is the one that is going to spread throughout the body. However, mutation in cells in the ovaries or testes of an animal or in the ovaries or anthers of a plant may be inherited by the offspring. If a cell containing a mutation divides to form gametes, then gametes would obviously have the mutated allele as well. And if such a gamete is one of the two which fuse to form a zygote, then the mutated allele will also be in the zygote. The single cell then divides repeatedly to form a new organism in which all the cells will contain the mutated allele. So genetic variation, whether caused by the reshuffling of alleles during meiosis and sexual reproduction, or even by the introduction of new alleles by mutation, it can be passed on by parents to their offspring, producing differences in phenotype. But variation caused by the environment is not passed on by parents to their offspring. Again, genetic variation during meiosis. During sexual reproduction, meiosis के दरमियान जब reshuffling होगी of these alleles, they are going to then pass on to their generation. So we have two types of variation, continuous and discontinuous variation. Phenotypic differences between you and your friends include qualitative differences such as blood groups, quantitative differences such as height and mass. फिर कुछ quantitative, ये qualitative differences हैं, ठीक है, blood groups हो गए, height, और quantitative होते हैं height and mass. Can you tell me what do you think is the difference in qualitative and quantitative?
You just told me what they are. Like
Hmm.
qualitative can either be mass
Hmm.
or height,
Hmm.
and qualitative can be like the color of our eyes. Does that count, or is that just phenotypic variation?
Qualitative आप कहो कि इस बुक का कलर क्या है, बहुत सिंपल ऑप्शंस होंगे। इस शेल्फ के अंदर कितनी बुक्स पड़ी हैं, बहुत सिंपल ऑप्शन है, नंबर
Or
ऑफ बुक्स है।
quantitative?
नो,
Okay.
बुक्स ऑन अ शेल्फ इज कॉल्ड क्वांटिटेटिव। ये ना याद रखो कि ये सिर्फ नंबर्स की गेम है, नहीं। क्वांटिटेटिव कैन बी द नंबर ऑफ बुक्स ऑन द शेल्फ, इट्स अ नॉमिनल डाटा, जितनी है। कुछ ही ऑप्शंस होंगे ना, कितनी, कोई अनलिमिटेड तो नहीं है, कोई डेसिमल्स में तो नहीं जाएगी वैल्यू। इट्स नॉट अ कंटिन्यूअस थिंग ही, ठीक है। कलर्स, कलर्स आर क्वालिटेटिव, कलर ऑफ रोज पेटल क्वालिटेटिव। ब्लड ग्रुप्स गिन के कितनी टाइप्स हैं, चार टाइप्स हैं आपके पास, ठीक है। ए बी या फिर ओ होगा। ये सारी होती हैं डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशंस। कंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन हाइट, हाइट में देयर इज अ रेंज, 0.0000 की रेंज से बहुत ज्यादा है। आप सोचो बिलियंस मिलियंस अनलिमिटेड रेंजेस हैं इन हाइट्स, इन मास, गॉट इट। वो कंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन के अंदर आएगा। जब क्वांटिटेटिव डिफरेंसेस एक पॉपुलेशन बहुत ज्यादा है कि इनमें यार एक कंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन है। क्वालिटेटिव वेरिएशन, ये मेरे को डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन क्या है यार, ये रोजेस की एक स्पीशीज है, चार ही कलर आ रहे हैं और तो कोई पॉसिबल कलर्स नहीं होंगे, ठीक है। दैट इज अ डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन। क्वालिटेटिव differences fall into a clearly distinguishable category, clearly डिस्टिंग्विशेबल कैटेगरी विथ नो इंटरमीडिएट्स। इंटरमीडिएट है क्या, ए और बी के दरमियान की कोई चीज है, नहीं है। बी और ए बी के दरमियान की कोई चीज है, नहीं है। अगर मैं कहूँ कि बुक्स शेल्फ के अंदर अभी आपकी कितनी बुक्स पड़ी हुई हैं, अब कितनी आप कहोगे ये तो सर नंबर है, ये क्वांटिटेटिव क्यों नहीं है। क्या 1.5 बुक पड़ी है, पौने 2 बुक पड़ी हुई है, 2.5 बुक पड़ी हुई है, नहीं। एक है, दो
No,
है,
there's a
तीन है,
definite
चार है।
number.
एग्जैक्टली, ठीक है। ये तो नहीं कि पौने 2 बुक पड़ी है, इवन नंबर है, लेकिन इज इट कंटिन्यूअस, कोई वेरिएशन है, कोई कंटिन्यूअस वेरिएशन आती जा रही है उसमें, नहीं। इट्स अ डेफिनेट
Um,
नंबर। एज है, एज
um,
आप कंटिन्यूअस कहोगे या डिसकंटिन्यूअस है?
age is it's discontinuous. No, it's continuous.
गुड, इट्स
Wait.
कंटिन्यूअस, एग्जैक्टली, ठीक है।
Yeah.
क्योंकि एज के अंदर भी 1 ईयर 2 ईयर इज नॉट द एज, इट्स 1 ईयर एंड हाउ मेनी मंथ्स, हाउ मेनी वीक्स, हाउ मेनी डेज, हाउ मेनी आवर्स, मिनट, सेकंड, मिली सेकेंड्स। Qualitative differences fall into clearly distinguishable categories with no intermediates. For example, you have one of the four possible blood groups, इसके चारों के अलावा कोई और ऑप्शन तो है नहीं कि पौने 2 ए आ गए, A.5 आ गए, आधा बी है, आधा है हूं मैं। दिस इज एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ discontinuous variation. So genetic variation are the differences between the DNA-based sequences of individuals within a species. Phenotypic variation are the differences between the observable characteristics of individual within a species. And discontinuous variation are the differences between individuals of a species in which each one belongs to a small number of distinct categories with no intermediates. Intermediates होते हैं बीच की वैल्यू नहीं है। Continuous variation are the differences between individuals of a species in which one can lie at any point in the range between the highest and lowest value. हाईएस्ट वैल्यू आप कोई भी 1 ले लो, लोएस्ट वैल्यू 0 ले लो। ये दो ऑप्शन ही, इसके दरमियान ट्रिलियन ऑफ ऑप्शंस होंगे एंड यू डोंट नो दोस। इन कॉन्ट्रास्ट, अब ये आपके पास क्या, डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन का ग्राफ आपको नजर आ रहा है, या ए है, इतनी पॉपुलेशन बी ग्रुप की है और इतनी पॉपुलेशन ए बी ग्रुप वाले की है। But in contrast, the quantitative differences between your individual height or masses do not fall into distinct categories. हाँ, रिसर्च के वक्त वी मेक कैटेगरीज। कभी रिसर्च में आप जाओगे भी, आगे बैचलर्स में जाओगे, यू आर गोइंग टू डू योर रिसर्च इन द फाइनल, वहां आप क्वांटिटेटिव को क्वालिटेटिव में कन्वर्ट करते हो। आपने गूगल फॉर्म भरे होंगे, वहां पे हम
Yeah.
अपनी रिसर्च को आसान करने के लिए क्वालिटेटिव कैसे देते हैं डाटा, एज को। क्या मेरी एज 15 to 20 है तो ऑप्शन ए कलेक्ट कर दो। अगर मेरी एज 21 to 24 के तो मैंने ऑप्शन बी सिलेक्ट कर दो। अगर 25 एंड अबव है तो ऑप्शन सी सिलेक्ट कर दो। ये उन्होंने क्या किया होता है रिसर्च में, अपनी जो स्टूडेंट्स रिसर्च शेयर करते हैं, दिस इज दे हैव कन्वर्टेड द क्वांटिटेटिव डाटा टू क्वालिटेटिव डाटा, ताकि उनको अब वो उसको वैल्यूज असाइन कर देंगे, फर्स्ट ग्रुप, सेकंड ग्रुप, थर्ड ग्रुप। मैं सेकंड में आता हूँ। अब उन्होंने मेरी एज नहीं पूछी, बट दे हैव टेकन अ क्वालिटेटिव ग्रुप्स, उन्होंने उसको कैटेगरीज में कन्वर्ट कर दिया। इवन हाइट्स के साथ ही हो सकता है, वेट के साथ ही हो सकता है। व्हेन द हाइट्स ऑफ अ लार्ज नंबर ऑफ पीपल आर मेजर्ड, देयर आर नो डिस्टिंग्विशेबल हाइट क्लासेस. Instead, there's a range of heights between two extremes, and this is a continuous variation. You can see कि किस तरह का आपको difference नजर आ रहा है. A bar chart is used to show discontinuous variation, but to show continuous variation, there's a proper line graphs. क्योंकि हर point के ऊपर you have a different height, a different individual with a different measurement as well. So discontinuous variation is caused entirely by genes. सिंपल सी बात है, डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन सिर्फ जीन्स की गेम है। आपका ब्लड ग्रुप क्या डिपेंड्स ऑन योर जीनोटाइप ऑफ योर एलील्स। कंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन इज आल्सो अफेक्टेड बाय जीन्स इन द एनवायरनमेंट। फॉर एग्जांपल हाइट है, वो आपने क्या पेरेंट्स से इनहेरिट किया, या आपका लाइफस्टाइल ऐसा था, या एक्सरसाइज बहुत करते थे, या डाइट ऐसी थी। उसमें रेंज ऑफ फैक्टर्स आती है। बट डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन के अंदर कौन सा फैक्टर है? सिर्फ ओनली जीन्स। उस पे एनवायरनमेंट का कोई इफेक्ट नहीं है। कंटिन्यूस में जीन्स भी है, एनवायरनमेंट भी है। ठीक है, एनवायरनमेंट में आपका लाइफस्टाइल, आपका डाइट, आपका एक्सरसाइज, आपकी फिजिकल एक्टिविटी, आपकी स्लीप, बिल्कुल अनकाउंटेबल फैक्टर्स आ जाते हैं। बट डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन इज ओनली कॉज्ड बाय द जीन. So both discontinuous variation and continuous variation are affected by genes. Both may involve several different genes. However, there are important difference between them as well. For example, अब डिफरेंसेस क्या? इन डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन, डिफरेंट एलील्स एट अ सिंगल जीन लोकस हैव अ लार्ज इफेक्ट ऑन फिनोटाइप। मतलब कि डिफरेंट एलील्स एट अ सिंगल जीन लोकस वुड हैव अ लार्ज इफेक्ट ऑन फिनो, मतलब कि एक जीन के ऊपर भी एक लोकस है, एक सिंगल जीन वुड आल्सो हैव अ लार्ज इफेक्ट ऑन योर फिनोटाइप एज वेल. Continuous variation के अंदर you have different alleles at a single gene locus which have a small effect on phenotype, and different genes have the same often additive mixed effect single effect on the phenotype as well. Continuous variation के अंदर large number of genes may have combined effect, लेकिन it would be only based on your genes. उसको हम कहेंगे polygenes. If different number of genes have a combined effect on your phenotypic trait, उसको हम कहेंगे polygenes, which is the number of different genes at a different loci that all contribute to a particular aspect of phenotype. डिसकंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन के तो एक जीन आ जाएगी अफेक्ट लेके, बाकी of उसको अफेक्ट एनवायरनमेंट करेगा, डाइट करेगी, लाइफस्टाइल करेगा, स्लीप करेगी, फिजिकल एक्टिविटी करेगी, फलाना फलाना, तो वो कुछ मिलके बनेगा. कंटिन्यूस वेरिएशन मैंने आपको बताया इट ओनली डिपेंड्स ऑन जीन. तो अब जीन के ऊपर ही अगर सिर्फ डिपेंड करे, तो वहां पे अगर आएंगी भी ना बाकी फैक्टर्स, तो वो बाकी जीन्स ही होंगी ऑफ डिफरेंट लोग, लेकिन होंगी जीन्स ही. यहाँ पे जीन एक होगा डिसकंटिन्यूस में, लेकिन बाकी फिर अदर फैक्टर्स होते हैं. इज इट क्लियर?
Yeah.
In chapter 16, you met a number of examples of discontinuous variation where different alleles of a single gene had a large effect on phenotype. You also saw how two different genes at two different loci can interact to produce phenotypic differences. हमने dihybrid inheritance पढ़ी थी. Dihybrid inheritance के अंदर क्या था? दो different genes है और दो different loci. बात कलर की हो रही, साथ फर साइज भी आ गया. A situation known as epistasis, the inheritance of sickle cell anemia and hemophilia, are also examples of discontinuous variation in humans caused by the variation in alleles of HBB. इसी तरह flower color in salvia is also an example of discontinuous variation in other species. It is actually very difficult to find good examples of large effects of a single gene in an organism, such as in your chapter 16, there were some. It is much more common to see a large number of different genes affecting a पर्टिकुलर करेक्टरिस्टिक. फर्क है, एक जीन ढेर सारे डिफरेंसेस लाए, या ढेर सारे जीन मिलके एक डिफरेंस लाए, दोनों में बहुत फर्क है. Multiple alleles such as those involved in the determination of blood group are the norm, and usually there are many more three possible alleles from any one gene as well. Two of the typical effects of inheritance of continuous variation, the small effects of different alleles of one gene on the phenotype and the additive effect of different genes on the same phenotype, can be seen in an organism's height as well. या आपके पास एक सिंगल जीन अफेक्ट करी, या पे डिफरेंट जीन्स collectively affect करी, they can all contribute to the difference in height. Suppose that the height of an organism is controlled by two unlinked genes, कैपिटल ए स्मॉल है, कैपिटल बी स्मॉल बी. इसमें रिसेसिव एलील जो है ना, ए और बी, वो कंट्रीब्यूट करते हैं हाइट के लिए. डोमिनेंट एलील्स दोनों 2x सेंटीमीटर ऐड कर देती है. सिंस द इफेक्ट ऑफ जीन्स इज एडिटिव, द होमोजाइग रिसेसिव वुड बी हाउ मच टॉल? ए ए ए ए, ये कितनी टॉल हो जाएगी? 4 सेंटीमीटर ओनली. बट अगर आपके पास होमोजाइगस डोमिनेंट आ जाए, अब मैंने देखा था कि ये एक डोमिनेंट टू करता है, टू 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 टू, कितना हो गया टोटल? 8 centimeter. This is known as an additive effect. The other genotype will fall between these extremes as well. अब इसके अंदर 6 centimeter वाली टाइप भी आएगी, इसके अंदर आपके पास 5 centimeter वाली टाइप भी आएगी। एक डोमिनेंट, तीन रिसेसिव हो, चार डोमिनेंट है तो 8 centimeter आ रहा है, चार रिसेसिव है तो 4 centimeter आ रहा है। ठीक है, फिर दो रिसेसिव दो डोमिनेंट हो गए तो 6 centimeter आएगा, तीन डोमिनेंट एक रिसेसिव would give you 7 centimeter as well. For example, what might happen if these two homozygous individuals interbred, और यहाँ पे एक F2 जनरेशन भी एक इंटरब्रीड हो जाए? The number of offspring and their potential heights according to the genotypes are summarized in the histogram over here. 4x कब आएगा? जब दो रिसेसिव है, जब चारों के चारों रिसेसिव है। 5x कब आएगा? एक डोमिनेंट है, तीन रिसेसिव है। 6x कब आएगा? दो डोमिनेंट है, दो रिसेसिव है। 7x, तीन डोमिनेंट होंगे, एक रिसेसिव होगा। और 8x जब चारों डोमिनेंट थे। गॉट इट?
Yeah.
So this is known as the added effects of the alleles of two different genes affecting height. Now imagine that the variation might be if the effects of the dominant alleles of the two genes were not the same. For example, if allele A added 3x centimeter to the potential height rather than 2, then आपके पास एक Punnett square में वो आपके पास और फिर effects आ जाते, फिर तो आई गेस 12 centimeter हाइट बन जाती, अगर आपके पास डोमिनेंट वाले एक साथ चार मिल जाते हैं। इनफैक्ट देर आर मेनी मोर देन टू जीन्स दैट अफेक्ट हाइट इन ह्यूमंस एंड इन मोस्ट प्लांट्स. It is also common for a large number of genes to be involved, each of them having a small effect and all of these effects adding together. The control of height is therefore a polygenic effect. Here you can see कि हमने किस तरह से when we crossed a 8 centimeter tall plant with a 4 centimeter tall plant, आपके पास ये F1 जनरेशन आ गई, और फिर हमने उसी F1 जनरेशन को जब इंटरब्रेट करवाया टू प्रोड्यूस एन F2 जनरेशन, यू कैन सी दैट इन अ पनेट स्क्वायर एज वेल कि आपके पास किसकी कितनी पॉसिबिलिटीज आ सकती है। Moreover, each of these many genes have many more than two alleles, adding to the potential for different heights. Now, add in the effects of the environment, and it is easy to see why height shows continuous variation. Any value of the height can be seen over here, lying between the two possible extremes. In a classic experiment, American geneticists Laugh Emerson and Edward East crossed two varieties of maize which had distinctively different cob lengths. Both of the parental varieties, Black Mexican and Tom Thumb, were homozygous for most of their genes. The cob lengths of the plants used as parents, first and second generation of the offspring resulting from the cross were measured to the nearest centimeter, और वो इनके इस तरह के कुछ आ गए थे results in their F1 generation and their F2 generation. Now, where you see variation in the same feature in different population, हम टी टेस्ट को भी इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं to compare the means of the two population. For example, the mean length of the cobs of the Tom Thumb and black Mexican parents, and the result would tell के significance थी या नहीं थी, जैसे हमने inheritance के अंदर chi-square और टी टेस्ट को पढ़ा था. Can you tell me what's the difference between continuous and discontinuous variation?
Okay, so continuous variation would just show differences of like the range from highest to the lowest value. But for discontinuous variation, आपके पास जो ना intermediates के बगैर you have like
It's underwater.
like
Mhm.
it's like basically
5%
divided
realize
into a
how the
class.
is
So it's like a definite value for discontinuous variation of intermediate units, obviously. Yeah.
Good, good, ठीक है.
Hi guys, in this video we'll be looking at sources of variation, variation between individuals, continuous and discontinuous variation, and then we'll finish with a summary.
So in any population of organisms or individuals, there is always going to be some variation between those individual organisms. And because we say this, we have to say that organisms are all unique. So within a population of humans, you merely need to look around to notice that everyone has slightly different features, different heights, skin colour, hair colour, eye colour, all different things which make us all independently unique. Even when we have the situation of identical twins, even though they start off with the same clone DNA, they develop differently in the womb from each other, and they end up having very slight but very clear differences in appearance and their DNA. So even two identical twins through their life can develop pretty major differences. And there are many ways that organisms can differ from each other, because there are many possible sources of variation. So if we look at various different types of tree, we've got lots of ways in which they can be different. For example, we can look at differences in the width of the trunk. We can look at the various heights of the trees. We can also look at the number of leaves, the type of leaves, the colour, their age, lots and lots of different factors. And the variation between individuals, whether that's in a species or between species, can be due to their genetics or their environment. So for example, hair colour and eye colour tends to be due to genetics. So DNA codes for the genes which control the colour of the eye and the colour of the hair. But some features like freckles or toning of the skin can be influenced by the environment, because the freckles and the tone of skin can be affected by the level of sunlight. And as well as this, we can have an individual's genetics and environment interacting both together, where they both influence a particular trait. And we call this a combined effect or an interaction. For example, certain plants may have genes that make them taller, but at the same time, there may be an environmental factor in that the soil may have increased nutrients, making them taller as well. So both of these interact to give the plant a greater height. So let's look at the different types of variation we can have between individuals. So individuals from different species tend to show a large amount of interspecific variation. So interspecific variation is the variation or differences between any two species. So inter usually means between, so between species. Intra will be the next definition, which is more to do with within. So you merely need to look at different species to see that there are so many differences between them. For example, palm trees versus ash trees, beech trees. You can see that even from a faraway distance, they have different shapes, different morphologies, different types of leaves, thickness of the trunk, different features. You could go on and on and on. So interspecific variation between trees or between cats and dogs or between humans and sharks, very large amount of variation between them. And as well as this, we get individuals within the same species differing too. And this is called intraspecific variation. Intraspecific variation is the differences between members of the same species, because intra tends to mean within or inside. So for example, we can look at dogs, and all dogs tend to be classed as the same species, but obviously we can have lots of different types of dog. We can have very small dogs, very big dogs, furry dogs, short hair dogs, different shapes, different barks, etc. So we say that there are subgroups or subspecies of dogs. And a population with a greater genetic diversity, so a greater variation in alleles and types of genes, tend to show a greater intraspecific variation. So here, populations with lots of alleles will have more genetic diversity and therefore more variation, as opposed to this population where there's less genetic diversity and therefore less variation. We can also have two types of variation known as continuous and discontinuous. So if you're looking at a particular characteristic or trait, like hair colour or colour of eyes or freckles or presence of hair, there are two types of variation and one characteristic will fall into either one. So some traits show continuous variation. Continuous variation is where there are two extremes and a full range of values in between. So this refers to something like, for example, height. Because height can be any value, from the smallest human all the way up to the largest human. The height can be any particular measurement along here. If this guy was 270 centimeters and this guy was about 120 centimeters, someone can be 150, 269.99999. There can be any single value in between this. Other examples are things like antigens on a cell. So for example, the different types, the different protein sequences, and the different numbers of antigens on the cell, the number of leaves on a tree, anything which can have any value between the tallest and the shortest, or the biggest and the lowest. And when we look at continuous variation in a population, most people tend to be close to the mean or the average value, and then at each end, where there's the extremes, there are less people. So if we were to have a chart with, for example, height, but this can be any kind of continuous variation, we'll call it trait, and then we had number of people on here, on the y-axis, then what you tend to see is that most continuous traits follow a normal distribution, where most people are surrounded around the average. So most people are of an average height, because you can see that on the y-axis we hit the highest point, but the very short people and the very tall people are at the extreme, and less people are like this. If it were more like that, then there would be a higher average height. And the traits which show continuous variation tend to be regulated by both multiple genes and influenced by the environment. So somebody's height, for example, can be influenced by genes, of course, but as they grow, they may be underfed or overfed, they may exercise and stretch more, therefore they may actually grow to be taller. Weight is a good example, which can be influenced both by many genes, because some people are more prone to putting on weight than others, but also it's influenced by the environment, how much you eat, how much you exercise, current state of mind, and the environment and occupation that you're part of. And then the other definition is a type of discontinuous variation. So a discontinuous variation is where there are distinct categories with no intermediate values. So with height, when it was continuous, we could have been any single height in that range. But with things like eye colour, there are only really distinct types you can be. You can be blue, brown, and sometimes people count things like green and hazel. But the point is, they're very discrete colours which you can only be one of. You can't be bluish brown, you can't be brownish green. Usually you fit into one of the categories. And with discrete variation or discontinuous variation, individuals tend to be distributed quite evenly between the different categories. So over the world, we tend to see the same amount of people that have blue eyes are equal to about the same amount of people who have brown eyes. And the traits that show discontinuous variation are often regulated by one single gene, and the environment can't really influence it. So for example, a mouse that's born with black hair will be born with black hair no matter how the environment in the womb or its life changes itself. This would be the same for a brown-haired mouse, and also the same for a white. Just like the same with us, with our blue and brown eyes, if we're born with it and we've started developing with it, no matter how the environment of the womb or the outside changes, that will be the same feature.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're looking for an amazing
So this was a summary for the discontinuous and continuous variation that we have talked about here, topic number 1. Okay. Now moving on, do you have any idea what is natural selection?
Like, in order to survive, there are specific traits that an organism needs to be able to fit in that environment. So that's natural selection.
Natural selection is जब nature select करती है किसी organism को that this one is going to survive. For example, brown polar bears and white polar bears in Antarctica. Which do you think survived and which were naturally selected?
Polar bears and
Brown polar bears and white polar bears.
white polar bears.
Exact. Why? Because maybe they were able to camouflage in Antarctica. ठीक है वो Arctic जो area था, it was also white. Polar bears also camouflage, लेकिन brown one weren't. They were vulnerable to predators. Maybe ठीक है या उनका फर शायद डिफरेंट हो तो उनको नेचर ने सिलेक्ट किया था. फिर आर्टिफिशियल सिलेक्शन क्या होती है? Can you tell me?
Humans are involved with the process.
Humans are involved in the process, exactly. ठीक है जैसे मेरे पास 2 cows हैं, one of them gives more milk, the other one doesn't give that much milk. मैंने अगर ब्रीड करवाना हो उन cows को तो obviously I am going to breed those cows which are giving me more milk, ताकि जो मेरी आगे F1 generation आए cows की, they are going to all give the same amount of volume of milk. That is artificial selection. I select my desired gene and do it. All organisms have the reproductive potential to increase their populations. Rabbits, for example, produce several young at a time, and each female may reproduce several times each year. If all of the young rabbits survive to adulthood and reproduce, then the rabbit population would increase rapidly, and this shows what is happening to the numbers in population upon time. Now, this sort of population growth actually did happen in Australia in 19th century, जब 12 pairs of rabbits from Britain were released on a ranch in Victoria as a source of food. The rabbits bred rapidly and there was an abundance of food and there were very few predators, जिसकी वजह से the number of rabbits soared and they increased exponentially in this type of growth. So great that they seriously affected the availability of grazing for the sheep as well. ये इतने ज्यादा बढ़ गए वहां पे rabbits के उन्हें sheep की जो grazing का food था वो भी consume करना शुरू कर दिया by themselves over grazing as well. Such population explosions are rare in normal circumstances, although rabbit populations have the potential to increase at such a tremendous rate, they do not usually do so. As the population of rabbit increases, various environmental factors come into play to keep down the rabbits numbers. जैसे कि biotic factors भी आएंगे, competition for food आएगा या फिर abiotic factors. Biotic factors by living organisms होते हैं, competition is also by living organism, and abiotic factors में light, sunlight, water, soil, water, न्यूट्रिएंट्स इन द सॉइल, ये सारी चीजें आ जाती हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, an increasing number of rabbits will eat an increased amount of vegetation until food is in short supply. The larger population of rabbits may allow the populations of predators such as foxes, toads, and weasels to increase. Overcrowding may occur, increasing the ease which the diseases such as meiosis may spread. This disease is caused by the virus that is transmitted by fleas and it is actually fatal. अब overcrowding की वजह से diseases भी आ सकते हैं. Because closer together the rabbits were living, the more easily the fleas, जैसे कि जुएं होती हैं, वो एक फर से दूसरे फर में ट्रांसफर हो रही थी from one rabbit to another. These environmental factors act to reduce the rate of growth of the rabbit population. Disease was an overcrowding एक environmental factor है. Now, of all the rabbits born, many will die from the lack of food, may be killed by predators, may die of myxomatosis. Only a small proportion of young will grow to adulthood and reproduce, so population growth will then slow down. तो इस तरह के factors होते हैं that can slow down the growth of population. This is true for most populations of organisms in the wild. The number of young produced is far greater than the number which will survive to adulthood, and many young die before reaching the reproductive age. Environmental factor is a feature of the environment of an organism that affects its survival. Biotic factor is an environmental factor that is caused by living organisms. Competition is the need for resource. दो plants आपस में compete कर सकते हैं for sunlight. And abiotic factor are any other environmental factor जैसे कि light intensity, availability of carbon dioxide या फिर वो soil pH भी हो सकता है. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Selection, pressures, and survival. What do you understand by this term?
I don't know.
What determines which will be the few rabbits to survive and which will die? हमने ऊपर कहा ना कि एक population है, उसमें से few of the rabbits will survive, few will not. वो जो few survive करें, वो कौन decide कर रहा है? Survival of the fittest. It may just be luck. However, some rabbits will be born with a better chance of survival than others. Variation within a population of rabbits means that some will also have the features which give them advantage in the struggle for existence. One feature that can vary is coat color as well. Many rabbits have a normal agouti brown allele color and some of them which have a white coat color as well. Now, white rabbits will stand out distinctively from the others and are more likely to be picked out of the predators such as fox. अब जो लोग एक ब्राउन फॉरेस्ट एरिया में रह रहे हैं, अब वहां पे व्हाइट रैबिट क्यों सरवाइव करेगा? व्हाइट तो बहुत चमकता हुआ नजर आएगा उस जंगल के अंदर, तो एगूटी रैबिट्स आर गोइंग टू सर्वाइव. The chances of a white rabbit reproducing and passing on its allele for white coat would also be very small. जाहिर सी बात है, जब वो सरवाइव नहीं करे तो क्या उसकी एलील आगे ट्रांसफर होगी? बहुत कम चांसेस है. क्या उसका ऑफस्प्रिंग प्रोड्यूस होगा? बहुत कम चांसेस है. सो द टर्म फिटनेस इज ऑफन यूज्ड. ये फिटनेस बायो में अलग चीज है, दूसरी अलग चीज है. फिजिकल एक्टिविटी फिटनेस नहीं. दिस इज फिटनेस यूज्ड टू रेफर व्हाट extent to which organisms are adapted to their environment. Fitness is the capacity of an organism to survive and transmit its allele to its offspring, कि वो survive भी करे और वही अपने वाले alleles आगे अपने offspring के अंदर भी transfer करे. In this example, predation by foxes is an example of selection pressure. क्यों? Selection pressure ये है कि आपके पास predators भी थे, ठीक है, और आपके ऊपर एक pressure था कि आप select नहीं हो सकते. Increase the chances of some alleles being passed on to the next generation and decrease the chances of the others. In this case, rabbits with at least one allele for agouti coat would have a selective advantage over rabbits with the allele for white. वो उनके पास बिल्कुल chance नहीं होगा जो white वाले हैं. The agouti brown rabbits have a better chance of reproducing and passing on their alleles to their offspring, and the alleles for agouti will remain the commoner alleles in the population, while the alleles for white will remain very rare. As this selection continues to act over many generations, the frequency of agouti alleles is likely to increase, while the frequency of the alleles for white coat will decrease and they may even disappear completely. उस चीज को हम कहते हैं extinction. जब एक पॉइंट वो बिल्कुल भी आपको एक एलील के आपको व्हाइट का कैरियर भी नहीं दिखेगा, that is extinction. The effect of such selection pressures on the frequency of alleles in a population is called natural selection. Natural selection increases the frequency of alleles, conferring an advantage, and reducing the frequency of the alleles, conferring a disadvantage. Fitness, as we just talked about, is the ability of an organism to survive and reproduce. Selection pressure is an environmental factor that affects the chance of survival of an organism. Organisms with one phenotype are more likely to survive and reproduce than those with a different phenotype. And natural selection is a process by which individuals with a particular set of alleles are more likely to survive and reproduce than those with other alleles over time and many more generations. The advantageous alleles become more frequent in the population then, or जो disadvantages होती हैं which are not able to survive, they are no more found in the population. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Good.